Hello everyone, and welcome to a rundown of Star Wars Destiny, where Zach and I are going to take a look at kind of the state of things and the things that we learned from Jeremy Zwirn, who is the lead designer of the game now. Got a chance to talk to him at Worlds when we were there in November. It was the first Worlds without a Star Wars component.
First one, yeah.
But we wanted to talk to Jeremy about Star Wars anyway, because a lot of things have been happening with Destiny recently. So we're going to share clips from that interview as we go along, and also give our own opinions on things as we go. So let's kick this off with basically Jeremy talking about the future of the game, and that was really the key thing that we wanted to nail down. We've seen some design decisions. A lot of action chaining, a lot of speeding up of the game, a lot of people leaving second set, third set, saying this isn't for me anymore, those kinds of things. So the first thing that I think both of us really wanted to know from Jeremy, is that a problem? What is your vision for the game? So let's kick it off with that.
Ideally, the interactivity is there. Like, I do something, you do something, back and forth. I mean, clearly we push action chaining a little bit too much with the first few sets there. So I guess that's another thing I'd like to do in the future, try and tone that back a little bit. So that's clearly a well-defined mechanic of the game where just, do something, try to predict what your opponent might do during their turn, and have the possibility to, slow your opponent down or stop them. Or I think it's very integral to good gameplay is interaction, just having that back and forth where instead of how currently some games can go where you just do a bunch of stuff, resolve all your dice, and then kill your guy. Well, that's definitely not what, to me, the game should be about. So I think I really want to push that more, just being those interesting plays where you have to predict what your opponent's going to do and then be able to chance to react instead of just watching them do what they want and feel helpless. So to me, that's one of the best things about Destiny is early on, like the first set one, that was definitely there, having that great interaction back and forth. So I think I'd like to push that more and have that be kind of one of the defining features of the game.
I can't tell you how happy I was to hear that.
I was super happy to hear that.
Because I played Hanrei at Worlds.
Yeah.
Which is
so you're the test case for everything I don't like about the game.
Action cheatingest of action cheatingest. But you go to Worlds to win.
Sure.
But for me, I've been saying, even at Worlds, right? Playing Hanrei, which is, again, as action cheating as it gets, or as action chaining as it gets, I even at that point was saying I would be okay if every single action gaining thing in the game was just gone.
Yeah.
Because I do those early games we played back in the early Awakenings days.
In the early days, yeah.
That moment of I roll dice in, you either do something or not about it. I remember having to make the decision: do I save my resources for this control card, or do I upgrade my board and roll in?
I felt like the game was built around that dynamic.
And that constant back and forth is 100% what makes Destiny special.
All right, well, Jeremy agrees, which is good. And that kind of leads us to the next reality, which is, if that is your philosophical understanding of the game, and worth noting, Jeremy, for those that don't know, Jeremy is remarkable at games.
He is.
I know that sometimes if you're watching this, maybe you haven't heard us talk about him on the podcast or elsewhere, but this is literally a guy who just walks in and won 3 world championships.
No, it's 5.
5?
It's at least 5.
Because all new games.
Yeah, he was the first Netrunner world champion.
Yep.
He was the Conquest world champion.
Yep.
He was the
Call of Cthulhu.
Call of Cthulhu. He was
that Warhammer game.
Warhammer
was
Invasion.
He the Warhammer Invasion?
He's got, I think, at least 5 world championships.
I mean, he'd even have world champion in Arkham, the card game.
But I will, in talking with him, and you'll see this coming through down the line. It's like, to me, him understanding the action, the interactivity of the actions being significantly important. He's also very good at keeping things in the box.
Jeremy
in a good
is
way.
a box designer. He in his brain, because when I watch him play games, right? His evaluation is so, I feel like it's always based in, quite simply, resources spent versus benefit gained. And that if anything is too good on that equation, he's aware of it and using it. Or if anything isn't good on that equation, he's not using it.
And as a designer,
that's incredible.
That's great, because there's not going to be the, as far as we've seen, and even with Legacies, you start seeing it, it's like, there's none of the, obviously absurd
Like,
things, right?
oh my gosh, this is busted. Like FN the first time you see it.
The first time you
it's
see
like,
nines, or the first time I saw Vibro Knife.
Yeah.
It's like,
What?
What?
Yeah, this is crazy. Well, given that, let's take a look at what Jeremy said about kind of the future of the game. We got a couple of clips here from that interview, so take a look.
Hopefully the game will be slowed down a little bit. It's definitely a long-term goal. I'm not sure how long they might have to take to do that. I mean, if it's even that viable to slow the game down that much with that big of a card pool, it's a tough challenge. So I also like to kind of differentiate hero and villain and the colors a little bit more. I think at the moment they're maybe a little too similar overall. Like, I think that's one reason villains have been so good. They can do a lot of stuff that heroes have been able to do, but better. So, like a card like Buyout, it's like, I prefer if that was like hero instead. If heroes, discard cards from the top of a deck, much better than villains, but then villains could discard cards from hand better than heroes to help make them more different, have a different kind of play style. And also colors too. I think colors overall could be better defined and have more unique things where they clearly do this best compared to other colors to help make sure decks feel different when we play them instead of just, doesn't really matter what color I play, they can do almost anything. So I think that's one of my goals, help make that more differentiated between colors and the sides, have a kind of more different, unique feel whenever you choose a certain color or side instead of samey feel in a way, how I feel it is right now. Is kind of push that more and see what that feels like. Kind of reward you for playing shields, and that's one of those things that helps differentiate heroes from villains. Heroes love shields, villains can take them away. Villains are more aggressive, heroes are more defensive, so that's one way to show that heroes and villains are unique. And also the color pie too, trying to say the blue is definitely more about shields than the other colors, so I think they'll definitely be more important as sets come out in the future here. I'd prefer if games lasted a little bit longer, like 4 or 5, maybe closer to 5 on average each game. Games that last only
5 turns.
Yeah, 5 turns, or 5 rounds, I should say.
Yeah.
So yeah, games that last only like 3 rounds or less, that's not nearly as fun. There's a lot less, choices, decisions made during those games. So that's a lot of times those decks are a bit too strong. So in the long run, let to try to tone that stuff down, make defensive cards a little bit better, make shields a little bit more viable to help make those games even more interesting and a lot more interaction going back and forth. And middle should always be out there. It should be viable, but I'd prefer if that wasn't like the best deck clearly, where big field of the tournament was all doing middle decks. To me, that's not Destiny. And I think for a lot of other players that agree, that just doesn't feel like Destiny. So if it's viable, sure, it's out there, but
sure,
if it's clearly the best deck, then I'd really not have it.
So honestly, that's almost everything that I could hope to hear. Now I do have one question, but first we're going to slow the game down. Heroes are going to be a bit more shield focused, defensive. Makes sense. Villains can be a little bit more offensive. I mean, when you think about Star Wars and the kind of good versus evil, the light side versus dark side kind of mentality, it very much seems like there's always an aggressor, which is typically the villain, and then trying to be, defended against, which is kind of the rebellion and the light side.
You basically have the attacker and defender, right? And even it's cool if you can specifically think about Sith and Jedi, which Sith is about aggression and emotion and damage and all this kind of stuff, whereas Jedi are peace and calm and meditation and, I'm going to use your offense against you kind of a situation. So
it definitely feels like if you're going to have a defensive slant to one of these factions, it's going to be hard, right? Because one of your factions, your villain faction, is trying to do offensive damage, and the way you win the game is through damage, right? So that's very easy, right? Villains doing their thing. But the way that you can then make defense a viable option and also still have enough damage to win the game that way, it does make you wonder, well, are heroes supposed to sit back defensive and mill the villains? And I was very happy to hear that that's not really Jeremy's vision, that mill kind of exists, but it doesn't. But I always wonder if there's a win condition or a style of play in your game that you would never really want to see as a prominent win condition. I'm wondering why it exists in the first place, right?
Well, I think the way I hope to see it framed with the hero villain is, imagine in terms of the structure of a turn, not the structure of a game. So technically, if a game goes on too long, that may end up favoring the heroes, because if they do have the ability to discard your cards or basically not die, if that's their thing. But in terms of, imagine if villains were better earlier in a turn and heroes were better later in a turn, so that
weather the storm and
heroes are basically not taking, and you see it now without it necessarily being hero or villain, where it's like you get about halfway through a turn and you realize I've spent all my dice and not really done damage, and you still haven't really spent yours or activated your characters. So that's where I think, like, you know, if they can basically weather the storm, you know, they'll save resources for control cards or for protection, and then once they kind of have let you play out your tricks and use your energy, they can spring back into action and kind of do their thing.
Yeah,
But
makes sense.
we'll see where that gets taken.
Well, so we have the vision, right?
So now that we know that's where he wants to take the game, which I'm excited about, I hope to see a return to a 4 or 5 turn Destiny. And honestly, the other thing is that if games are lasting longer, 5, 6 turns, and if heroes are particularly good at making a game last 6 turns, it's not even that I'm going to deck you, but maybe I have abilities or interactions that the longer the game goes, the more powerful they get.
Sure.
And who knows what those look like. But just the reality of some characters, right? They have an ability, and the more times you get to use it,
the better it is.
the better you're going to have a chance of winning.
I could even see a card that says, like, based on the number of rounds, or like if this is, I mean, that would be very difficult. But, you know, you could do the number of upgrades on the board yields you X or something like that. So as the game goes on, you can have effects that actually play off of that.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a hero-centric.
And so now that we have a framework for where this is hopefully going to end up going, I think it's cool to be able to look at the rules reference updates and see how those are maybe attempting to accomplish this or set us on a path to accomplish that. So we're going to kick it off with the Errata, which is probably the most straightforward of the changes.
Yeah,
least
been around.
Poppy.
That's not really a new thing either. I mean, there was Errata on a number of things in the past in Destiny that were trying to prevent, like, unlimited combos and that kind of thing.
Sure. So the 2 most significant Errata to me are Vibroknife, which it went from, if it's on your board in play, all your melee damage is unblockable. So it goes under shields, it gets around Force Illusion. Yeah, right. And it's a 2-cost upgrade with great sides and ambush, so it's just super good. But also Imperial Inspection, which was a 0 cost. If you roll a Disrupt, you can exhaust it, bounce one of your opponent's upgrades.
That's right.
And it was a very oppressive card. So gonna hear from Jeremy here on what, you know, general thoughts on Errata and what was behind the Errata in particular to Vibroknife.
Yeah, so definitely try to avoid Errata, you know, mostly at all costs, and it's very difficult for newer players to understand that sometimes, and they play a card and their opponent tells them it doesn't work that way anymore. I mean, it says it's right here in front of me, but it's changed, so just makes it a lot less approachable for newer players. So yeah, we'll try to avoid Errata as much as possible, but some cards will just need it. Hitting a card like Vibroknife was definitely too good to start with, but again, trying to not give Errata as much as possible is like, do we have to nerf this card right now or not? It's kind of a lot of tough calls there were decided, and in the end, it was like, yeah, just shields are an integral part of the game that could kind of bypass them far too easily and make them inconsequential. So, in a sense, it's neutral gray, like any deck could play Vibroknife, so a bit too ubiquitous, so it really did punish shields too much. So, it's nice to put that at more of a fair power level to help incentivize shields and then overall heroes too, since they're the ones that primarily benefit from shields. Hidden Vibroknife also help extend those games a little bit longer and help prevent those blowouts, especially like a first turn character being defeated. And hopefully it'll make that less common, so that's another goal of that.
So avoiding Errata, always a good thing.
Yeah,
obviously, I don't know of a single designer
confusing.
who's going to say, we love Errata.
We love changing
we
the text
love
on our
fixing
cards.
the things that maybe were a little too strong.
I think it's cool, the whole FAQ, and you know, to frame it, there was a lot of rules reference updates happening for a lot of games that were more aggressive than we had really seen out of Fantasy Flight Games. But I think this move really shows that they are willing to make changes and make sure that the game is in a healthy spot.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, the Vibroknife change makes shields relevant again. And if you're wanting shields to be an important part and you're wanting to distinguish certain
necessary.
colors and certain sides, and it also slows the game down. It makes it where shields can prevent your character from dying instead of just getting
Shields
sniped.
naturally do slow it down, right?
Yeah.
You got to soak that damage. And I was happy to see that, and I think it also speaks to exactly what we're talking about with Jeremy, both the Imperial Inspection and the Vibroknife. Is that trade too good? Is the cost too low for what you're getting? I mean, ultimately is the question being asked. And I think that there was a swing taken at pretty much everything, even It's a Trap, that poor card that didn't exactly deserve it. But you think of it from Jeremy's perspective, right? It has ambush and it has a super impactful effect. It could potentially, I mean, if you look at the potential of that card, it could be 14 damage, 18 damage on the best of
Unrespondable
circumstances.
damage.
That's the thing.
The trick.
It's both unrespondable and the upside could be game breaking, right?
Yeah.
So you go in and you fix the ambush problem, and then it's like, well, it could still show 12 damage, and that's crazy for a card.
Yeah.
So then it's like, well, we got to fix that too. And while that maybe makes It's a Trap very, very less enticing as a card, it's the philosophy at work here. It's that I don't want this to be too potentially powerful,
Sure.
and I don't want it to be unrespondable. And we see that in Vibroknife getting taken down as well. All these changes seem very much in line with the thinking that Jeremy's bringing to the table.
And another element of this is a card like It's a Trap is putting you in a box for any red die card you design, any character, any upgrade. It's like it's sort of like a Vibroknife. Even after the change, it's like I'm still willing to put it in my deck.
Yeah.
The thing about It's a Trap
That means
is
it was a good errata.
yeah, it's like the fact that it's still in decks
Yeah.
says a lot. Same with Nines. It's like we'll talk about him, but with It's a Trap, it was a double hit, no ambush anymore, and limited to 2. I'm not certain that's going to be in decks ever, so maybe it is a little too far, but I would also rather it not exist than have that be a problem
certainly.
in the future.
And then finally we have, or not finally, secondary, we have the Balance of the Force list, which is this reminds me very much of the Most Wanted list for Netrunner, which was trying to find a way to change the balance of the game without really kind of, focusing on destructive techniques like banning. And I think Balance of the Force does this really well. I like the idea. I think you can solve a whole lot of problems in the game simply by adjusting point costs of characters. That is a huge, it's similar in X-Wing, right? Like you can do a lot just by adjusting a point here or there and potentially
of a ship or an upgrade. And I would actually, it's not currently the case, but I would be just fine if point costs were not even on these cards.
Yeah. You got the new player concern, and out of the box
fair.
you got to look something
if the
up,
starter
but
characters had the point cost,
Sure.
but like I do think, I mean, any character is a problem, and it's like if you adjust point cost, they could do, like even Rey from the Awakenings, which I think is the most obnoxious character still.
Totally.
If she's 20 points, like she's not obnoxious anymore.
You've
You
done
know what
it.
I mean? Like she's
13,
she's
15,
fine, and you don't have
14.
to. And I think I want to hear from Jeremy here on what was behind this change, but I do think it's an elegant way to change a lot by changing a little.
Let's take a listen.
Always trying to find ways not to give cards, direct errata. So, and just one idea, like, well, if we modify their points, it's not permanent, and they can be changed in the future. So, if we feel they're not as powerful as they are some time down the line, we can take them off the list or move them on the list, knock them down a level or so. So that's one benefit of doing that instead of erratas. So I think it's just a lot easier to have a list of characters that all kind of are affected in the same way, just their points are slightly different, instead of having their text all be different in a different way.
Yeah.
It's just their points are a little bit different. So I think it's just a lot easier for players overall to grasp that than having to do specific errata for each character.
And I completely agree here. I mean, I think it is a great way to change all these cards. You don't have to introduce a bunch of errata, because I thought they were going to errata Nines and Rey and just this big list. And it's a very simple thing. You think about it when you're building your team, and then it's done. Like you don't have to ask questions anymore.
I mean, the thing is, so we played Infinity for quite a while too.
Yeah.
And I don't know why more people haven't taken up that cup, basically, of, if you can just constantly update the costs of things on the fly in seconds, and then it goes out to all of your player base via like an app or
pretty
online
crazy.
or whatever, that's great. So like even this moment, like every day you could see the point cost of characters change. If Jeremy so desired.
Yeah, I mean, that might be a bit aggressive. But
it would be aggressive.
If it was like,
Theoretically.
if it was like first Friday of the month,
Force Friday.
Force Friday. First Friday of the month. You just update
You
all
get
the
your new
point
balance
costs.
of the Force
I mean,
list.
I'd be down.
Yeah, you could keep it swinging.
And you could just change things and make it. Anyways.
But the point is, he has the ability to do that, and anybody in the future has the ability to do that.
If that existed,
So
which
it opens up.
So.
It opens up the ability to balance the game a lot better.
And maybe the biggest change here, which I want to get to, is there's a fundamental rule change brought into the game.
Yeah, it's crazy, Zach. I've never seen this.
I was gonna say I don't think I've seen it this
Never seen
intense,
this.
and I will say I don't disagree. But it was the upgrade rule change. So originally you could play an upgrade on a character, and then you could replace that upgrade with another upgrade, reducing the cost of the new upgrade by the cost of the original upgrade.
Ad infinitum.
And so we're going to cut to Jeremy here before we really dive in to kind of understand what was behind this change and where it was coming from, what it was looking to affect.
Since originally that rule was intended to essentially be once per round, where you play an upgrade and the next round you could upgrade to a more expensive one instead of just replacing it for 0. So the intent of the rule is to basically play expensive upgrades, like 3, 4, 5 cost upgrades.
That's what lets you kind of like resource
Ramp
up to it.
yes. Not sit there and replace ones for free over and over. And there wasn't much fun playing against those decks, especially FN. So we're trying to find a good solution that could hit all those at once, ideally. And that was the best thing that we could think of, to modify that rule to limit it to some degree.
So once per round upgrades was kind of the intention when the game was being developed.
Yeah.
Isn't that insane?
I mean, the idea, right, is the resource ramping.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if we're going to have 4 cost upgrades and you're only getting 2 resources a turn, you can't reasonably expect to save 2, have 2 the next round, spend all of your resources to play an upgrade, because you'd have to make them insane.
Correct. Begs the question, why is that not the case with supports?
Well,
Just begs the question.
I'm not going to beg anything. But I mean, I think it's the reality of if you aren't intending on having this like constantly recurrable upgrade chain happening, if that's not possible, someone like Nines makes a lot more sense.
Absolutely.
Like if you actually
a lot
have
of
to
upgrades make more sense.
spend the money on Nines to play the upgrade on him, and you get to roll it in, and it's way more in
Ambush
line.
makes more sense.
Or even Ray.
Ray makes more
right?
sense.
It's like if you can't just have a 2 cost and then play 3 2 costs in a row on her to gain 6 actions, it's way less abusable.
Right.
And if I have 6 money, I could play 2 or 3 upgrades on her and take a bunch of actions, but like I can stop your money, or I can deal with like decks should have options to restrict how abusable that is.
You know, the other thing that strikes me about this change, box mentality. It's a rectangle. But we're talking about Jeremy with boxes, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
he's
Back to the box.
Rather than thinking about, man, I have to consider what happens if this upgrade gets played twice in a round, because you could have 2
Yep.
in your hand, or if 5 upgrades get played with an ability that triggers off of upgrades. Now I got to do limit once per round on all of these abilities that involve upgrades. It's like if you think about it in terms of just boxing it in and making it tidier, then that definitely is accomplished with this rule.
Yeah, I mean, any unlimited anything is always a question. And so you have something like Nines that, I mean, you could just play 6 or 7 upgrades on in a single turn thanks to Boundless Ambition.
Yeah.
And Nines is a very cost-effective character to bring to the game to get his ability.
It's nuts. But it is also weird. Let's just be real here. It's very weird that such a fundamental part of the rules gets out the door, utilized for 3 sets, and then has to get reined back in by essentially a new designer.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and I mean,
How does it get out the door? I mean, it's fine, but you got to ask those questions, right? When
Yeah.
you're coming back through and changing fundamentally, it'd be like if you're playing Magic, and then all of a sudden it's like, and we're changing it to where like 1 land is worth 2 things. It's like, well, how do you not see that when you're developing the game all the way up, right? I don't know.
I mean,
Just calling it how I see it.
I don't know. I prefer what's happening now.
I like it better. I mean, I'll say that. I wish it were like that from the beginning.
Yeah.
That would have solved a lot of problems
now,
up front.
I will say, because in the original rulebook, the upgrade replacement rule is one little line in the rules.
So a hint that perhaps it was hastily added at
Popped
the
in.
end.
Well, maybe. But the other thing for me is we played for a while.
Didn't even know that,
Not
did we?
knowing you could do that.
We didn't know you could replace upgrades.
That's what I'm saying. It's like we didn't know you could replace. And that is the original Destiny that we played. And that's the original Destiny that I was such a fan of.
Yeah.
Because it was this slower, the idea of not spending money on an upgrade and instead playing control cards was viable versus like.
Or you could save your money and play the 4 cost next turn,
That's what you had to do. So actually, at that point, 4 cost didn't get played.
That's right.
It was like we ain't ever getting
a good
here,
reason for that.
except for in decks that I guess had a lot of money.
It's a good change. It's a weird change, but it's a very good change. And so I'm happy to see all of this kind of getting ironed out and boxes being put around things that have traditionally been left to hopefully this doesn't break.
Yeah.
So I don't think Jeremy's that kind of a person.
And what was happening in particular, so before this FAQ, so we have the errata, we have the balance of the force, we have the upgrade rule change. Before this was happening, it was like 7 out of 8 decks would be 9s.
Yeah.
In top cuts. So like top 8 of a big tournament, 7 out of 8 are 9s centric.
Blinking red light right then. Yeah.
That's red light. Now there are easily 5 or 6 different decks that are that. And if you go top 16, it's like 10 plus decks.
I have seen all of the decks coming down recently from various tournaments that have been starting to happen. It's massive. There's new stuff coming out all the time. I'll see a new list and it's like, well, I hadn't even seen that before.
Maybe my favorite is that the new 2-player starter, Ray Poe, that pairing is winning a lot of tournaments, which is great.
So what you're saying is that this stuff is working.
And that's the more important part than the variety of decks, because that wasn't even a goal. Like when we're talking to Jeremy, it's not like, hey, I want to make sure there's 10 different decks in the top cuts.
Right.
When you're actually playing the game now, like even locally here in Tulsa, like I'm playing way better. Games are already taking 4 or 5 turns instead of 2 or 3. I don't feel like I'm just losing games because of craziness on turn 2 anymore.
Good.
So,
okay. Well, these are good things.
all signs point to good. So speaking of signs pointing, we also
yes, please segue that one.
point right over here. No, we have Legacies on the horizon.
Yes, we do. It looks great. I'm going to be honest. I mean, I'm not fanboying on Destiny for any particular reason on this video, but I do think that it looks like the best set so far.
Like just visually,
I wish
the
this
aesthetic.
had been the second set. Honestly, I wish this had been the first set from what I've seen of it. All the iconic characters that you want, right? We've seen Yoda now. We've seen. Did we see Boba finally? We saw him on a box.
There's
at least,
Boba in the starters. Yeah,
Is
there's
that
the,
Luke?
there's
It's
Luke
classic
and,
Luke.
yeah, the starters are Han, Luke, Boba, and Stormtrooper.
It's all the iconic stuff, and it all seems fundamentally just good card design. There's nothing that's like, oh, this is insane, or it's confusing. It's just gain a shield for doing a thing, gain a resource for doing a thing. I love it. I love how controlled it is. It feels very, very
Yeah,
cool.
and the set also is introducing a lot of new things. So I want to hit Jeremy up real quick. This is the first base set. So they introduced this concept after Awakening sold out in 2 seconds, which is they're going to have a base set at the first of the year, and at the first of their, I guess, the Destiny year, Destiny calendar year. And then there's going to be 2 sets that follow that. And the base set is supposed to be in print as often as possible. It has the starters, and it's kind of...
It will actively be reprinted.
This block of 3 sets is called a cycle. So let's cut to Jeremy to talk about base sets.
These big concepts, like a new card type or a new die face, those are pretty big concepts. So, we have the little rules insert in each starter deck, so it's the best time to introduce big concepts like that, since we have a follow-up rules insert to go right with it. But we can also do other stuff in those follow-up sets too. They're a little bit more minor, not as big as new mechanics. So, possibly like a new keyboard or something in a follow-up set might be a deal spot for that, since we can do reminder text on there. You don't need a rules insert to
introduce
realize what it does. Yeah, it's just kind of it's on the card. So.
All right, so Legacies is the first real base set. Because Awakenings came out, the base set wasn't a concept. Now Legacies is introducing, we have this new theme with like the very white minimal, which I love, side note.
Of course.
Packaging design.
Ashes, what was the other? Takedo.
Takedo was the original that got me.
Angeles. Yeah, it always works.
But we're introducing a lot of new concepts here in Legacies, and we're going to talk about those and get Jeremy's take on a couple of them. The first one is indirect damage. So this is the first time we've added a new die side type.
It's a fine little die type too, isn't it?
It is a cool little die. So indirect damage, when you resolve it, your opponent actually gets to pick where it goes. So if you do 2 indirect damage, they get to put 2 damage across their board however they want. So we actually have a preview here.
Let's check it out. Force Wave.
From Legacies to kind of showcase this. Force Wave, you want to run it down for us?
Yeah, blue character only on this one. It is a neutral blue card, and it has a special ability that is deal 3 damage to a character, then deal 2 damage to a character, then deal 1 damage to a third character. which is fascinating for a lot of reasons. First, you have to pay for it anytime you trigger the special, so you can see the die here.
Yep.
It also has 2 straight indirect damage sides and then the 1 resource. But the thing about triggering this ability is, what if your opponent only has 1 character?
Then you have to hit yourself.
It's perfect. It's like this force wave is happening. Sometimes there's friendly fire involved, sometimes there's not, and it's playing on this idea of getting damage on the board and just kind of having to make hard decisions about, do I really want to trigger that and do 2 damage to one of my characters or 1 damage to one of my characters and already do 5 to theirs? These kinds of questions are, to me, why I think Jeremy is going to bring a lot of interesting cards to the game, because this is exactly, by the way, a Zwirn style card.
Which
it's like you've got to weigh the consequences.
And the thing about this too is that not only is it blue character only at 3 costs, so there's some restrictions here, but it's got 4 sides that do damage.
Yep.
Which is not common. Like that's not a thing that you just see all the time. But like you said, they're doing damage in interesting ways, right? It's maybe I have to do damage to myself. Maybe you get to pick where the damage goes. But at the same time, if I'm playing against, we've seen the Jawa and the Battle Droid, which are 6-point characters. Yeah. So there are going to be lists that have, we've already seen characters with, or lists with 3 characters, now 4 characters, possibly 5.
Possibly 5.
So
Force Wave's a good
Force
good
Wave,
tool.
obviously, against 3 battle droids is pretty good. So thematically, it's hitting the things. But I want to get Jeremy's take on indirect damage, because it is the first time we've introduced a new die type, and just how often is that a thing we're going to see, and where does this come from?
Well, overall, it's definitely weaker than direct damage, since your opponent gets to choose where it goes. So to help balance that, we try to raise the values on it overall a little bit more than direct damage. And just doing like a new die symbol is kind of fun and interesting, So indirect damage can definitely affect the game overall to make it longer and have that first character that dies, potentially first or second turn be less likely, since your opponent can shift the damage to a different character. So I think overall it'll be good for the game to help tone those first turn blowouts be a little bit less likely, at least overall. I mean, some characters will still have that direct damage and deal really quickly, but being able to do another damage type can help prevent that, make it a little bit less likely. Yeah, it seems like it's weaker than direct damage, since your opponent chooses where it goes, but at times it can be better. If they have 2 characters in play, they can't overassign indirect damage. You can only do it equal to the remaining health plus shields on the character.
All right, so we have a big FAQ update, Errata, Balance of the Force, rules change, fundamental shake. We have the first base set with Legacies coming out, and it is introducing indirect damage, power actions, traits, plots, the whole gamut.
What more could there possibly be?
I'll tell you.
Yeah?
The biggest, bestest thing that could possibly have happened to this game, which is we are getting a draft starter.
Yes, it's
now,
true.
The draft starter introduces a couple new concepts. One is neutral characters. The second is a 6-point Jawa.
Yeah.
That's little news compared to it's big. It's a neutral characters.
They did neutral characters pretty well. I thought that they did that really well.
They made a good choice on the characters, but the reality is that this is the first official sign we've had of limited play, which is draft and sealed.
It's the official sign, right?
It's going to happen.
Are we going to see? We don't know. See, this didn't happen. This was after the interview.
Well, and I think it's past his scope
probably
of the thing, but
you gotta have organized play though for limited.
You gotta have.
I
mean, I think limited is so insanely critical to the future success of this game.
Would you be willing to say any collectible game?
Yes.
Necessary to have.
Yeah, limited? I mean, so here's why. Just running it down really quick.
Okay.
Here's why limited is so significant. You buy the starter, and it comes with certain characters and upgrades and stuff and everything you need to play. And then at that point, you can play a draft or a sealed. The draft is 6 booster packs of any set. Sealed is 8.
It's the next step.
It's the next step. So you can buy I don't know what the MSRP on the starter is, $15-20 starter. And then you can pay $15-20 playing a draft, and you're on equal footing. Yeah. Not only are you on equal footing with everyone else there, you're building your collection, you're gaining cards, right, while getting an experience. And the game itself is maybe the best version of the game. It's
an incredible version, certainly. Yeah. I mean, of the actual in-the-game gameplay, I think a lot of people would say, yes, certainly it is one of the best ways to play. But you are, of course, cutting out that kind of super creative, and a lot of the reason that we all play these games, which is, constructing that deck and putting your own ideas and creativity into it. But I, of all people, would certainly take the draft sealed format over constructed most times.
Well, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that, right? We're talking about all this changes and things being introduced is to kind of keep it at its essence of what Destiny is. And draft and sealed just has a way easier time of being that essence. And not only that, but you do have the longer games and you get to see more of what's going on and you get to see cards you don't normally see on the table. At the same time, I'm a huge fan of constructed, but when it comes down to it, it's like, do I want to see a draft and sealed world championship as well as constructed? Yes.
Yeah.
Like that would be awesome. And so it functions as both another form of high level play, whether it be at regionals or store championships or just in stores, but it is the perfect bridge in between starter and owning enough of a collection to play in constructed. So I was very excited to see this. I haven't played with the new draft starter. So
I haven't either.
We had our own kind of homebrew format that we were using for a while, and I love playing that.
Let me tell you the other thing about draft that is literally from people who I've talked to. This is the case. This is the answer that I've gotten. The first person I talked to was myself. Obviously, that's how I conduct my own affairs.
That's interesting.
And it was, I haven't really competed at Destiny since Worlds of this year, right? Qui-Gon Rey, and that was super fun, and I liked being, having the kind of alternative deck, and I did well with it, and I was super happy with that. But then it's like, I haven't really touched it much since then in a very competitive, like I really am exerting myself in this game. But if you were to tell me, like, tomorrow, hey, I know you don't have a constructed deck and you haven't thought about constructed in a while, but you want to play a quick draft or sealed of Destiny, I think every time I would say yes. Every time. And all of these players, from my lips to God's ears, as Ray would say, all of these players who started in Awakenings or wanted to get in Awakenings and couldn't, and then they just didn't collect the game. And then the ones that dropped down in the second set and said, not for me. The ones that dropped down in the third set and said the game is imbalanced. I'm almost willing to guarantee that at least half of those people would pick up a Legacies draft or sealed immediately. Like literally on launch. They would go to the store or their local group or whoever you're hanging out with and you just say, do you want to do this? And it's like,
The thing is, the only thing you need is the starter and know how to play.
Done.
But then the flip side of that too is that if you aren't interested in constructing and collecting, you get your stuff and you're there and people maybe want that stuff.
Trade it, sell it.
Trade it, sell
whatever
it.
it is.
And I just think it is the bridge in between new and casual and like, I have enough of this to really play seriously at this game. If you want to live there, that's great. If you want to stay at the casual level, you can still participate. And if you want to use it as a way to get to the point where you have enough of a collection to build a deck, it's also great. So I'm just hopeful they've announced it. And I just hope that it's not like the 2v2 in the Star Wars LCG, which is announced, they had a box for it,
and then
it's like, never hear about it again. Right, and they had some tournaments at Worlds and that kind of thing. But I mean, if I were picking myself, I would triple down on this. I would go draft and sealed crazy. Constructed would still be there, but the truth is the people that are going to play constructed and be excited about constructed are going to do that no matter what you do. Yeah. Versus, I think this can make this game explode. And important to note, part of this coming out, you can't really do this if there's not any product available.
He's right.
So like the timing of this, why wasn't this from the beginning? It's like even if this had come out with Awakenings, it really wouldn't have even been useful until recently.
That's true. That's true. And let me put a little suggestion out there into the universal Destiny community. Here's the other thing. I think constructed is a fitting like kind of world championship style event. Obviously, you can do a draft and sealed as well, but limited is kind of the undercover nucleus of collectible games to me. It really is what the whole thing revolves around, and it's necessary that it exists. Here's a format that I've been kicking around in my head.
All right, hit me.
So
not literally.
This is the sneaky way to get people to play constructed like me. This is how I kind of got. This is the sneaky way for me to start playing spoils and all this. Is all right. Hey, we're gonna do let's do this in the store. We'll do a month and a half or a 2-month. Every week we're going to do a draft or sealed tournament, like maybe one or the other, like draft 1 week, sealed the next week, draft the next. And then on the 8th week, we're going to do a constructed tournament with all the cards that you've gathered during that process. That's it.
Dude, you just gave me a great idea.
Do you understand? I mean,
Do you understand,
the
man?
ability to onboard new players and just to get excitement generated for Destiny. If you miss 3 of the events, that's fine. You can still play the constructed with 3 less options, basically 3 card pools left.
That's really fascinating. And imagining the idea of drafting partially for this event, but also knowing that I'm going to get to use this in future things. Imagine, we'll talk about this later. This is a different thing.
Do it though. Like, this is the kind of thing that you can start to unlock.
You can see the physical and emotional excitement building when we're just talking about it.
Physical excitement is at an all-time
Like,
high.
we're just moving a lot, right? Like, we're like high energy. I'm very excited to see what it does. I think that when I'm looking ahead, you know, kind of in conclusion here, for me at least, you have the setup of how Destiny came about. You have a new lead developer who I think has a great vision for where this game needs to go. You have signs in the FAQ that he's taking the game to that place. And in Legacies, you have a bunch of exciting things being introduced and pushing the game in this direction, moving it forward.
In a non-gimmicky way.
In a non-gimmicky way.
That's key.
And we have Draft and Sealed coming out, heading into this regional season. I mean, it's a really exciting time for the game, and I'm happy with where Constructed's at. I'm super pumped to get Legacies, and with all of that even, I'm more excited to start playing Draft and Sealed as a real official sanctioned format.
For the first time on all fronts for Destiny, supply, game, design, philosophy, releases, formats, I feel like all of the fundamentals are being taken care of for the first time.
Someone say there's a balance.
That's really good. It's really cool.
There's a balance. Well, thank you all so much for watching. We will, of course, be back with more Destiny content, so stay tuned. And until then, keep playing.